As president of the Institute of Asset Management, Christian Roberts knows that the sector has entered a new era that goes way beyond the logging and tracking of physical assets in a spreadsheet. We sat down with him recently to learn more about the ways in which asset management is evolving to keep pace with a rapidly changing world by unlocking value.
Chris Roberts, can you just share with us your thoughts on how organisations can unlock value and what this means in practical terms?
Certainly, yeah. I think what we've got to think about today is that value has shifted. So traditionally, we've thought about value in the context of service and productivity. We're now thinking about value in a very different way. We're thinking about impact on society. We're thinking about impact on the environment. We're thinking about how do we decarbonize that asset? How do we introduce more energy efficient processes within that asset? And all of that, when it comes together, we have to now start thinking about how we utilize technology in a different way to accelerate those transformations, how we come together as organizations in a different delivery model to accelerate that transformation.
You mentioned digital innovation. Can you tell us about a specific technical development and how this is transforming how asset value is realized?
We've been very slow to adopt technology when you compare other industry segments. So that creates a challenge in terms of bringing the industry along, but also creates a huge opportunity. What we've seen over the last couple of years, particularly in places like Europe, who've really invested in the digital twin component, so building out that digital representation of the physical asset during the construction process, but also building out that digital asset, able to hand that over to help to inform decisions throughout the full life cycle. That's the real opportunity. We've got some great examples in the UK and Europe where we've seen 10% improvement on schedule performance, which is a huge opportunity. But of course, as we start to think about the digital twin, this notion of having a full digital representation, I should say, of the physical asset, we need to start thinking about how we extend that beyond just the size and shape of the asset and start thinking about its carbon emissions, its impact on society and everything else, because those are the things which we're going to be expected to report on in the future.
You also mentioned organisational transformation. What is meant by this?
The next generation assets that I was talking about, the energy transition that you hear about in the media all the time, the building out the resilient supply chains that we're focused on in the United States, for example. When you look at that, it requires a workforce that doesn't exist today. So we expect peak demand for the 3 funding bills that have been put out in the United States, for example. Peak demand won't hit until 2028, and yet we've already got a deficit of within the workforce today, and we expect that to increase as the silver tsunami, the continuation of retirement happens over the next 5 years. So for us, as we start to think about how we can take more of an asset management view of this, how do we unlock value, we have to sort of move away from thinking about just output from asset and how we deliver that with people. And we have to focus on delivering the outcome from the asset, the value component, and looking at the most efficient and effective way to do that. Which means we need to be thinking about technology, as we've just talked about, but it also means we need to be reimagining the delivery model, thinking about long term, what are those alternative delivery models that we should be looking at to put in place assets that can contribute to that value. So thinking about things like assets as a service.
In what ways have you seen partnerships unlock value?
I think a good example of that is when you look at the demand side energy sector. So if you take real estate, for example, the use of energy performance, energy savings contracts, that's been ongoing for many years. But we've started to see a shift in that space away from organizations providing energy service to organizations providing infrastructure as a service, assets as a service, which means that I'm able to accelerate the investment that's needed in my building systems. I can introduce more efficient building systems. I can introduce low or no carbon building systems.
How are these changes creating new opportunities to grow the investor base?
I mentioned a moment ago about the opportunities that exist in the US with government grants, loans, and tax incentives. It means that we can reduce the capital and thereby the cost of capital for delivering those projects. In addition to that, when you look at the bond issuance market, there is a real appetite for issuing bonds which are delivering projects with a low or no carbon outcome. And of course, for those organizations that are fully taking advantage of these new opportunities for funding, what we're seeing within those organizations is they're becoming more attractive to the market, basically.
I mean, you mentioned obviously the challenges facing the asset management industry, but are you optimistic? Isn't it an exciting time?
It is, yeah. I think, the Institute of Asset Management hits 30 years next year. So it's a real opportunity for us to celebrate how, as a professional community, we can come together and help the globe move forwards with the infrastructure challenges and opportunities that it faces. I think the other thing that's worth sort of acknowledging is that the Department of Energy did research recently that looked at international standards for quality, for environmental and other such management systems, and saw this inflection point at the 10-year mark of a real uptick in growth and accelerated use of international standards. And so next year marks the 10-year anniversary for the International Standard for Asset Management Systems. So we sort of expect these two things to come together with the opportunities that we're seeing in infrastructure investment. So I'm really excited. I think it's going to be a really interesting decade ahead of us.
Chris Roberts, thanks for speaking to ITN today.